So, hello and welcome back to episode 3 of season 2. Today, we're talking about how to handle relapse and setbacks in recovery. Now, so often and mind blowing often, I see clients come to me that have worked with clinics, therapists, dietitians, recovery coaches and not been given a relapse plan. Now, I cannot tell you how important a relapse and relapse prevention plan is. And it's something I do with all clients, whether people come to work through me one-to-one or with a group program. I think it is so essential because the reality is that relapse and setbacks are a very normal part of the recovery process and a really important one. Actually, it helps us identify things that maybe we still need to work on, and also builds our resilience in recovery. And I think we forget that actually for a long time, our eating disorder is going to be the strongest tool that we will have in our toolbox. So maybe earlier in recovery, things like maybe a stress at work or falling out with your husband or something like that might be enough to cause a little bit of a setback. As you go on in recovery, then it takes an awful lot more, usually, to create those setbacks and relapses. Maybe a bereavement, maybe something that's a really significant life event. And that's because over time, as we have those little setbacks, and maybe full-blown relapses through recovery, we build that resilience, and we sort of fill the gap, so to speak, that leave us feeling a bit more vulnerable, as well as those behaviours over time becoming our new default. I think it's really important we're compassionate with ourselves during this process, but also put like our investigative hats on, because it's so difficult actually when you're in that place where you're like, oh, I'm so annoyed with myself, I'm so frustrated, like what's wrong with me, why can't I just do this, everybody else has recovered and I'm still here, to actually access that sort of curious mind, because we're in that place of kind of victim, blaming, in a very emotionally heightened state. So when we start to look for information and it starts to allow us to actually be more compassionate with ourselves. And today I'm going to be talking to you about really how to create your own relapse prevention plan. And this is something that you can use for slips and setbacks. So maybe you start to slip a little bit with your eating, maybe exercise starts to creep up a little bit. We're talking about those minor setbacks versus a full relapse where we fall back into eating disorder behaviour. And over time, as you become more attuned to like picking up those setbacks, and I'll give you some tips to do that as well, then you pick them up earlier and earlier. And so rather than it become like a couple of days or weeks or months, like it's like, oh, I noticed I did that today, right, okay, let's kick that in the bud and just keep going, because I have that resilience in recovery. So it really is a skill, and it's a skill that gets easier kind of the more often we do it, and this is why it's integral really to our resilience in recovery. So there's two things we really look at when we're doing relapse prevention planning. We look at what signs do you have and are common for you, personalized for you, that show up when you're having a setback or a slip. What are those first things to go when you start to maybe step back into the disordered eating or the eating disorders? To give you some examples, some things that I see with clients quite often with those little setbacks is maybe a snack goes amiss one day and that becomes the new normal, or maybe things like low fat, low calorie options start creeping back in. Maybe they start struggling with their sleep, and maybe they tell me they're more anxious, maybe they notice they're starting to struggle with body image a little bit more. Those are all like flags in my head that go ding ding ding. Right, okay, so if you're more agitated, less sleep, worse body image, how's food been the last couple of days, tends to be what I ask. They're really clear indicators to me that there might have been a wobble with your calorie intake ultimately, because it's some of the first things that we see when the body goes, oh shit, here we go again, we're stepping back into a famine. Is that adrenaline starts to creep up, so it's that part of that migration theory, part of that famine response is gearing up. It thinks something bad is going to happen, right? So that's why that agitation, that poor sleep, anxiousness, and then body image concern quite often comes in as part of like coping with anxiousness, trying to control that external shape and weight. But so as I said, some of those other behaviours like, exercise increasing a little bit more, those diet foods, maybe sleep creeping back in. So it's important that you are familiar with what those are for you. When I work with clients, we create a long list of things that are quite often the first things that get dropped for them. And I think it's really important that you know what those things are. And those early signs are really, really important. So we want to get really attuned to catching those early signs. And once we've got that comprehensive list of what we notice might go wrong in those early days, then and also signs that you might notice later on, I think is really important as well. And then we want to make a list of what we do, right? What do we do when shit hits the fan? What do we do when I've noticed I've had a setback? And having this all predetermined, quite often when we're in that like slightly more agitated state, slightly maybe frustrated with ourselves as well, we're unable to maybe think so clearly. And so having this all pre-planned out just makes it really easy. So maybe you put on your plan of action stuff like, go back to a meal plan or a menu template that you have where it sort of takes away some of that decision making around food. That's kind of your baseline. It works. You can use it for a couple of weeks and just get yourself back into that rhythm of having those regular meals, eating every 2 to 3 hours, having those snacks, meals, etc. And that will really help, because we know that the more restricted our intake becomes, the more it warps our kind of thinking and our energy levels and our anxiety, and it becomes a bit of a cooking pot. So getting back onto that meal rhythm, template, menu, whatever you want to call it, can be really, really helpful to nip things really quickly in the bud. Other things to do, if you've got somebody that you trust, whether it be a partner, whether it be a friend, whether it be a therapist or professional you've worked with, asking for help, I think, is really important. Letting them know, I've noticed these things slip. I'm just going to keep an eye on how I get on for the next couple of days. I'm putting X, Y, and Z in place, making sure you ramp back up to your recovery, your recovery practices, come back in as well. And I think that's really, really important to remember that actually our recovery practices are about maintenance, right? And so often the reason why we do have those slipbacks is because we've kind of dropped the things that kind of keep us on that straight and narrow. And it can be hard, can't it? Having those recovery practices in place, whether it be meditation, whether it be those regular meal times, and thinking that this is going to be the rest of your life. And the reality is there's kind of like an in-between state. We kind of have the eating disorder or disordered eating self, we have the recovery self, and then we have the food freedom. And eventually, you'll get to the point where you can eat intuitively and all of those things. And I think so often we get frustrated with those recovery behaviors and think, fuck it, I'm not going to do that today, because why should I need to? And that can quite often set off. So remembering what those recovery kind of behaviors are for you, what works. I work with my clients to develop their toolbox, because ultimately we know that eating disorders are a coping tool, and making sure that we put healthy coping tools in first will take some pressure off the disordered eating doing it for us. So really coming back to the basics of your recovery, and hopefully you've already got that mapped out to an extent in terms of the tools and the behaviors you really need. If not, then it's definitely worth doing, and something I'm really happy to help with through group programs or one-to-one or whatever, because I think that this part is so crucial for us to having a lasting recovery, really. So once you kind of got that plan in place, putting that plan in place and taking action, and having that checkpoint maybe every week, coming back to your list and going, right, okay, where am I? I use a red, amber, green sort of process with my clients, so that they know what relapse behaviors kind of sit where they are in that scale, and they can kind of judge against that as to where that, whereabouts they are on that scale, whether they are moving forward or not moving forward, and have a plan in place in case that doesn't work out. So your plan one is I do X, Y, and Z, and if that doesn't work, what next? What's my oh shit plan? The shit has hit the fan, I'm still relapsing, who do I call? And that's quite often where we recommend putting things like getting professional help involved to help you really break that cycle. But the most important thing, as I said, is to remember that these slip-ups don't mean anything about you. It doesn't mean that you can't recover. It doesn't mean that recovery isn't possible for you. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that you're unfixable. It means that there is part of your puzzle missing, whether that be some trauma that you haven't worked on healing yet, whether that be maybe not having that basic recovery maintenance strategy, whether it mean that you're not picking up those sort of slipbacks early enough. I said they are inevitable, they are going to happen, they are part of recovery. So if we've not got a plan to kind of catch those earlier, and hopefully you've got some ideas of how to do that today, then we are going to be more likely to fall back into those relapses. But yeah, it is inevitable. So be kind to yourself, be compassionate with yourself as much as you can in that kind of slightly warped thinking that we get. Remember that, the more information you can take from this relapse, really, the better and stronger your recovery will be going forward. So putting your detective hat on, do some journaling, look through the last couple of days, weeks, months, what's changed, what have you dropped, what, has happened in your life, and really do that fact finding so you can look at really meeting your own needs going forward. I have got an episode, season 1, I think it's one of the early ones in season 1, about need meeting. I think that's a really good episode to come back to during times that we were really struggling. Again, putting that investigative hat on and going, right, okay, what slipped here? What needs am I not meeting that the eating disorder has come in to do for us? And having that inside out approach alongside making sure we're getting fueled properly, because that's going to really help our thinking, our cognitive thinking, and really safeguard us going forward. Hopefully that's given you a few things to do. I do a whole module on relapse prevention on the Break Free Bootcamp. So if you're interested, I'll put the waitlist link in the show notes. But I will leave it there. I hope you found this useful, and I will see you in the next podcast.